You're standing at a pigeon auction. The auctioneer holds up a bird. Direct son of Bliksem, he says. Grandson of Kittel. Motherline goes back to Kleine Dirk. The bidding starts at 1,500 euros and climbs rapidly. People are excited. These are famous names, champion bloodlines. Everyone wants a piece of that genetics. The bird sells for 4,200 euros. The buyer is thrilled. He just bought champion genetics. Or did he? 3 years later, that same buyer is sitting in his loft, frustrated. The bird he paid 4,200 euros for has produced 20 offspring. None of them won anything significant. A few placed in club races. Most were mediocre. The genetics everyone was excited about didn't deliver. The buyer wonders what went wrong. Did he get a bad bird? Was the pedigree fake? Is he a bad breeder? Or is there something about genetics he fundamentally misunderstood? This scenario plays out thousands of times every year in pigeon racing. People buy birds based on famous names and pedigrees, based on bloodline reputation, based on what they've heard about certain genetics, and they're disappointed when those birds don't produce champions. The problem isn't usually fraud, though that exists. The problem is that most people in pigeon racing don't actually understand how genetics works. They think they do. They talk about bloodlines and breeding theories and genetic combinations, but they're operating on myths, superstitions, and oversimplifications that have been passed down for generations. They're making breeding decisions based on misunderstandings about how traits are inherited, how characteristics are passed from parents to offspring, and what genetics can and cannot predict. Understanding genetics doesn't require a biology degree. You don't need to know about DNA sequencing or chromosomal mapping or molecular biology, but you do need to understand a few fundamental principles about how inheritance works, how traits are passed down, what you can control through breeding and what you can't. That understanding is the difference between breeding randomly and hoping for luck versus breeding strategically with realistic expectations. It's the difference between spending money on bloodlines that sound impressive versus investing in genetics that actually work. So let's start with the most basic question. What is genetics? In pigeon racing, people use the word genetics constantly, but what are they actually talking about? Genetics, in the simplest terms, is the mechanism by which characteristics are passed from parents to offspring. Every living thing, including pigeons, has instructions encoded in its cells that determine how it develops and functions. These instructions are called genes. Genes control everything from physical characteristics like eye color and feather pattern, to functional characteristics like flight speed and navigation ability, to behavioral characteristics like trap discipline and loft attachment. Every pigeon has thousands of genes, organized into chromosomes inside every cell of its body. When pigeons reproduce, they pass copies of their genes to their offspring. The offspring inherits half its genes from its mother and half from its father. This combination of parental genes determines what characteristics the offspring will have. That's genetics. It's the reason offspring resemble their parents. It's why you can breed 2 blue pigeons and get blue offspring. Why you can breed 2 fast pigeons and potentially get fast offspring. The characteristics are in the genes, and the genes are passed from generation to generation. Now here's what people get wrong. They hear the term bloodline and they think it means something mystical, something about the bird's blood. There is no such thing as champion blood flowing through a bird's veins. Blood is just blood. It carries oxygen and nutrients. It doesn't carry racing ability. What people call bloodline is actually genetic lineage, the specific combination of genes that bird inherited from its parents, which they inherited from their parents, tracing back through generations. When someone says this bird has Jansen bloodline, they mean this bird's ancestors include Jansen family pigeons, and presumably this bird inherited some of the genetic characteristics that made those Jansen pigeons successful. But here's the critical part that most people miss. Inheriting genes from champion ancestors doesn't guarantee the offspring will be champions. Genetics doesn't work that way. Just because your grandfather was an Olympic athlete doesn't mean you'll be an Olympic athlete. You might have inherited some of his physical capabilities, or you might not have. You might have inherited other characteristics from other ancestors. The genetic lottery doesn't guarantee any specific outcome. In pigeons, every offspring is a unique genetic combination. It inherits some genes from its mother, some from its father, and which specific genes it inherits from each parent is partly random. 2 offspring from the same parents can inherit quite different genetic combinations, which is why siblings can have very different abilities. You can breed the same champion pair 10 times and get 1 exceptional offspring, 3 good ones, and 6 mediocre ones. The parent's quality doesn't guarantee uniform quality in offspring, because genetics involves both inheritance and variation. Let's talk about dominant and recessive genes, because this concept is crucial and widely misunderstood. For many characteristics, there are multiple versions of the gene that controls that characteristic. These versions are called alleles. Some alleles are dominant, meaning if the bird inherits that version from even one parent, the characteristic will appear. Other alleles are recessive, meaning the bird must inherit that version from both parents for the characteristic to appear. If it inherits one dominant and one recessive allele, the dominant one determines the appearance. You're standing at a pigeon auction. The auctioneer holds up a bird. Direct son of Bliksem, he says. Grandson of Kittel. Mother line goes back to Kleine Dirk. The bidding starts at 1,500 euros and climbs rapidly. People are excited. These are famous names, champion bloodlines. Everyone wants a piece of that genetics. The bird sells for 4,200 euros. The buyer is thrilled. He just bought champion genetics. Or did he? 3 years later, that same buyer is sitting in his loft, frustrated. The bird he paid 4,200 euros for has produced 20 offspring. None of them won anything significant. A few placed in club races. Most were mediocre. The genetics everyone was excited about didn't deliver. The buyer wonders what went wrong. Did he get a bad bird? Was the pedigree fake? Is he a bad breeder? Or is there something about genetics he fundamentally misunderstood? This scenario plays out thousands of times every year in pigeon racing. People buy birds based on famous names and pedigrees, based on bloodline reputation, based on what they've heard about certain genetics, and they're disappointed when those birds don't produce champions. The problem isn't usually fraud, though that exists. The problem is that most people in pigeon racing don't actually understand how genetics works. They think they do. They talk about bloodlines and breeding theories and genetic combinations, but they're operating on myths, superstitions, and oversimplifications that have been passed down for generations. They're making breeding decisions based on misunderstandings about how traits are inherited, how characteristics are passed from parents to offspring, and what genetics can and cannot predict. Understanding genetics doesn't require a biology degree. You don't need to know about DNA sequencing or chromosomal mapping or molecular biology, but you do need to understand a few fundamental principles about how inheritance works, how traits are passed down, what you can control through breeding and what you can't. That understanding is the difference between breeding randomly and hoping for luck versus breeding strategically with realistic expectations. It's the difference between spending money on bloodlines that sound impressive versus investing in genetics that actually work. So let's start with the most basic question. What is genetics? In pigeon racing, people use the word genetics constantly, but what are they actually talking about? Genetics, in the simplest terms, is the mechanism by which characteristics are passed from parents to offspring. Every living thing, including pigeons, has instructions encoded in its cells that determine how it develops and functions. These instructions are called genes. Genes control everything from physical characteristics like eye color and feather pattern, to functional characteristics like flight speed and navigation ability, to behavioral characteristics like trap discipline and loft attachment. Every pigeon has thousands of genes, organized into chromosomes inside every cell of its body. When pigeons reproduce, they pass copies of their genes to their offspring. The offspring inherits half its genes from its mother and half from its father. This combination of parental genes determines what characteristics the offspring will have. That's genetics. It's the reason offspring resemble their parents. It's why you can breed 2 blue pigeons and get blue offspring. Why you can breed 2 fast pigeons and potentially get fast offspring. The characteristics are in the genes, and the genes are passed from generation to generation. Now here's what people get wrong. They hear the term bloodline and they think it means something mystical, something about the bird's blood. There is no such thing as champion blood flowing through a bird's veins. Blood is just blood. It carries oxygen and nutrients. It doesn't carry racing ability. What people call bloodline is actually genetic lineage, the specific combination of genes that bird inherited from its parents, which they inherited from their parents, tracing back through generations. When someone says this bird has Jansen bloodline, they mean this bird's ancestors include Jansen family pigeons, and presumably this bird inherited some of the genetic characteristics that made those Jansen pigeons successful. But here's the critical part that most people miss. Inheriting genes from champion ancestors doesn't guarantee the offspring will be champions. Genetics doesn't work that way. Just because your grandfather was an Olympic athlete doesn't mean you'll be an Olympic athlete. You might have inherited some of his physical capabilities, or you might not have. You might have inherited other characteristics from other ancestors. The genetic lottery doesn't guarantee any specific outcome. In pigeons, every offspring is a unique genetic combination. It inherits some genes from its mother, some from its father, and which specific genes it inherits from each parent is partly random. 2 offspring from the same parents can inherit quite different genetic combinations, which is why siblings can have very different abilities. You can breed the same champion pair 10 times and get 1 exceptional offspring, 3 good ones, and 6 mediocre ones. The parent's quality doesn't guarantee uniform quality in offspring, because genetics involves both inheritance and variation. Let's talk about dominant and recessive genes. because this concept is crucial and widely misunderstood. For many characteristics, there are multiple versions of the gene that controls that characteristic. These versions are called alleles. Some alleles are dominant, meaning if the bird inherits that version from even one parent, the characteristic will appear. Other alleles are recessive, meaning the bird must inherit that version from both parents for the characteristic to appear. If it inherits one dominant and one recessive allele, the dominant one determines the appearance. This is why inbreeding can produce exceptional birds, but also produces many birds with problems. Fertility issues, poor health, shortened lifespan, compromised immune function, structural deformities, behavioral problems. These issues are caused by recessive detrimental alleles becoming homozygous through inbreeding. Every pigeon carries some recessive detrimental alleles. In outcrossed birds, these are usually masked by dominant normal alleles from the unrelated parent. In inbred birds, there's high risk of matching up the bad alleles from both sides because both parents carry similar genetics from their common ancestors. The tighter the inbreeding, the faster these problems emerge. Father-daughter or mother-son breeding is very tight inbreeding with high risk. Brother-sister breeding is even tighter. Within a few generations of close inbreeding, most lines experience serious problems unless you're ruthlessly culling affected birds. And even with ruthless culling, you're losing genetic diversity that makes the line fragile and potentially unable to adapt to changing conditions or recover from health challenges. Many famous pigeon lines historically practiced tight inbreeding to establish consistent traits. The Jansen brothers famously inbred to create their line. But what people don't see is the enormous culling that accompanied that breeding. For every exceptional bird they kept, they culled many others that showed problems from the inbreeding. They were maintaining the line on a foundation of exceptionally rigorous selection, eliminating any bird that wasn't excellent. Most breeders don't have the discipline, the numbers, or the ruthlessness to replicate that approach. Line breeding, breeding back to an exceptional ancestor repeatedly, has the same genetic dynamics as inbreeding, but slightly less extreme if the line breeding is more distant, like breeding to a grandparent rather than a parent. You're still increasing homozygosity, still concentrating the ancestor's genes in the offspring, still risking the expression of detrimental recessives. The benefits are more consistent traits. The costs are reduced genetic diversity and increased risk of problems. Should you inbreed or line breed? That depends on your goals, your skill, and your tolerance for culling. If you have an exceptionally outstanding bird and you want to concentrate its genetics, line breeding back to it can work. But you must test the offspring rigorously and cull anything that shows weakness. You cannot keep birds just because they're related to the champion. You keep only the birds that themselves perform excellently or produce excellently. The name on the pedigree means nothing if the bird has problems. For most breeders, moderate outcrossing is safer. Breed birds from related but not identical lines. This maintains the general characteristics of the family while bringing in some genetic diversity that masks detrimental recessives and provides broader genetic resilience. You get less predictability, but more robustness. For small-scale breeders who can't cull aggressively, this is usually the better strategy. Let's talk about selecting breeding birds based on performance versus pedigree. This is where theory meets practice, and where many breeders make critical mistakes. The fundamental question is, do you breed from birds that have proven themselves through racing performance, or do you breed from birds with excellent pedigrees regardless of their own performance? The genetic principle is clear. Performance is the only direct evidence of what genetics a bird actually inherited. Pedigree tells you what genetics were potentially available, what was present in the parents and ancestors, but pedigree doesn't tell you which of those genes this specific bird inherited. Performance shows you what this bird can actually do, which reflects what genetics it actually has functioning in its body. If a bird with an incredible pedigree races poorly, what does that tell you genetically? It tells you this bird, despite its ancestors, didn't inherit the right combination of genes to be an excellent racer. Maybe it inherited the wrong alleles. Maybe it has detrimental recessives expressing. Maybe the genetic combination just didn't work well in this individual. Whatever the reason, the performance is telling you the genetics in this bird specifically aren't producing racing excellence. If you breed from that bird anyway because its pedigree looks good, you're breeding from unproven genetics. You're hoping the genetics look better than the performance suggests. Sometimes that works. Sometimes a bird that races moderately still carries good genetics and produces well. But you're taking a bigger gamble than if you breed from a bird that proved through its own performance that it has functional, excellent genetics. The counter-argument people make is that some birds never get a fair chance to prove themselves through racing, injury, illness, bad weather on race days, poor training, bad luck. Maybe the bird would have been a champion if circumstances were different. That's possible. But breeding is about working with evidence, not speculation. If you have a bird that raced poorly, you have evidence it performed poorly. You don't have evidence it could have performed well in different circumstances. You're guessing. Better approach is to use performance as your primary selection criterion and pedigree as secondary. First, identify birds that actually performed well in races. Those are your candidates. Then among birds with similar performance levels, favor those with better pedigrees because they're more likely to breed consistently. Performance proves the bird has good genetics functioning. Pedigree suggests the genetics might breed true because similar genetics produce success in ancestors. This principle applies to breeding birds that never raced, such as hens kept for breeding from young age. You can't select those based on racing performance, so you select based on pedigree and on what they produce. But you test their offspring rigorously. If a well-pedigreed hen consistently produces excellent racers, you keep breeding from her because she's proven her genetics through her offspring. If she produces poorly despite her pedigree, you stop breeding from her because the evidence shows her actual genetics aren't producing quality. Breeding is an evidence-based process. Use whatever evidence you have, performance when available, production results when performance isn't available, and pedigree as supporting information. But always require evidence. Never breed primarily based on names and assumptions. Let's address genetic testing and DNA in pigeon breeding. Technology now allows us to analyze birds' actual genetic code, identify specific genes, and verify parentage. Should you use DNA testing in your breeding program? What can it tell you and what are its limitations? DNA testing for parentage verification is straightforward and valuable. If you want to confirm that a bird is actually the offspring of the parents listed on its pedigree, DNA testing can prove or disprove that relationship with high certainty. This protects you from fraud and from honest mistakes in record keeping. For valuable breeding birds, DNA verification of parentage is increasingly standard practice. DNA testing for genetic traits is more complicated. Researchers have identified some genes associated with racing performance, navigation ability, and physical characteristics. In theory, you could test a bird's DNA and see which versions of these genes it carries. The problem is that racing ability is polygenic, controlled by many genes, and most of those genes haven't been identified yet. The genetic markers currently available explain only a small fraction of performance variation. A bird might have favorable versions of the few genes we can test for, but unfavorable versions of the hundreds of genes we can't test for. DNA testing can tell you if a bird carries certain color genes, certain sex-linked traits, genetic markers associated with specific bloodlines. That information has some value, but DNA testing cannot currently predict whether a bird will be a champion racer. The genetics is too complex and we don't understand enough of it yet. Maybe in 20 years genetic testing will be predictive. Right now it's mostly useful for verification and for identifying some specific traits, not for predicting performance. Should you DNA test your birds? For parentage verification on valuable stock, yes, it's worth the cost. For trying to predict performance, no. Current testing doesn't provide that capability reliably. Save your money and test performance directly through racing. Let's discuss genetic diversity and why it matters. Pigeon racing has relatively small breeding populations in many lines. Famous bloodlines are often based on a few foundation birds that have been bred repeatedly. This creates genetic bottlenecks, where the entire line descends from limited genetic stock. What are the consequences, and should you be concerned? Genetic diversity means the variety of alleles present in a population. High genetic diversity means lots of different versions of genes available. Low genetic diversity means most birds carry similar alleles. Diversity matters for resilience. If a population has diverse genetics, different individuals respond differently to challenges. Some might resist diseases better. Some might handle heat better. Some might navigate in difficult conditions better. Diversity gives the population options to survive various challenges. Low diversity means the population is uniform. They all have similar strengths and similar weaknesses. If a challenge exploits their weakness, the entire population struggles. This is why heavily inbred lines sometimes collapse suddenly when faced with new disease or environmental change. They lack the genetic variation to produce individuals that can adapt. In pigeon racing, many popular bloodlines have low diversity because they're descended from tight breeding of a few champions. This gives them consistent traits, which is good, but makes them genetically fragile, which is bad. If you breed exclusively within one type bloodline, you're working with limited genetic options. If you occasionally outcross to different lines, you bring in fresh genetics that increases options. How much diversity should you maintain? That depends on your scale. If you're a large breeder maintaining 50 breeding pairs, you can maintain reasonable diversity within your loft by keeping multiple families and rotating breeding to avoid excessive inbreeding. If you're a small breeder with 5 pairs, you have less room for diversity and need to bring in outside genetics more regularly. Practical approach is to maintain a core bloodline that you like, the genetics that work well in your racing conditions and match your management style. But every few years, bring in new genetics from complementary bloodlines to cross with your core. Test the crosses, keep the ones that work well. Gradually incorporate beneficial outside genetics while maintaining your core foundation. This balances consistency with diversity, giving you both predictable traits and genetic resilience. Now let's talk about what genetic concepts are myths, because there's an enormous amount of folk genetics in pigeon racing that has no scientific basis. People believe things and pass them down because everyone knows or because they saw it once. But these beliefs don't reflect how genetics actually works. Myth 1, blood doesn't lie. Yes, it does. Or rather, genetics doesn't guarantee. A bird from champion parents can be mediocre. Happens constantly. Genetics is probabilistic. The blood, the genetics, creates potential. But each individual bird is a unique combination that might or might not inherit the best alleles. Blood tells you odds, not outcomes. Myth 2, you need a specific bloodline to win. False. Champions come from many different bloodlines. What matters isn't the name of the family, but whether that family's genetics work in your conditions with your management. A less famous bloodline that suits your style and your race roots might outperform a famous bloodline that doesn't. Bloodline is a starting point, not a conclusion. Myth 3, once you outcross, you lose your line. Not true genetically. If you cross your birds to an outside line, the offspring still carry your line's genetics, just mixed with the other line. If you then breed those crosses back to your original line, you dilute the outside genetics and concentrate your original genetics again, while retaining some benefits from the outcross. You can maintain a line while occasionally outcrossing for diversity. You just need to breed strategically afterward. Myth 4, late-bred birds are genetically inferior. No genetic difference between a bird bred in February versus May. Breeding timing affects development and training, which are environmental factors, but doesn't change the genetics the bird inherited. Late-bred birds might face environmental disadvantages, but their genes are fine. Myth 5, you can see genetics in a bird's eye. Eye color, pupil size, eye brightness, these are genetic traits, but they don't predict racing ability. No research has ever proven that eye characteristics correlate with performance. People believe this because they've seen champions with certain eye signs, but that's confirmation bias. Champions come with every type of eye. The eye sign theory is folklore, not genetics. Myth 6, the mother's side breeds true, the father's side breeds speed. Arbitrary distinction with no genetic basis. Both parents contribute all types of genes. Neither side specializes in certain traits genetically. What people are observing when they think they see patterns like this is usually coincidence, small sample size, or confirmation bias. Understanding what's real genetics versus folk belief helps you focus on strategies that actually work, instead of wasting effort on superstitions. Let's talk about practical breeding strategy based on genetic principles. How do you actually apply genetic understanding to produce better birds? Start with clear goals. What characteristics are you trying to improve? Speed, endurance, navigation, intelligence, trap discipline, health? You need specific goals because you can't select for everything simultaneously. Trying to improve too many traits at once dilutes your selection pressure and slows genetic progress. Identify which characteristics are most important for your racing program and prioritize those. Maybe in your region, speed matters most because races are shorter. Maybe endurance matters because races are long. Maybe navigation in difficult weather matters. Whatever matters most, that's your primary selection criterion. Test birds objectively for those characteristics. If speed matters, race them and record velocities. If endurance matters, race them at longer distances and see who consistently finishes well. If health matters, track which birds recover fastest, resist illness, maintain condition. Objective data on the traits you care about gives you evidence for selection. Select the best performers as breeding birds. Keep maybe the top 10 or 20% based on your testing. Cull the rest, or at least don't breed from them. This is called selection pressure. By breeding only the best, you increase the frequency of beneficial alleles in the next generation. Over multiple generations, this shifts the genetics of your loft toward better performance. Pair your selected birds strategically. Don't just pair the best cock to the best hen and expect magic. Look at what specific strengths each bird has. Pair birds whose strengths complement each other. If you have a cock that's extremely fast but sometimes gets lost, pair him with a hen that navigates perfectly, even if she's not the fastest. The offspring might inherit both traits. This is called compensatory pairing. Test offspring thoroughly. Don't assume offspring from good parents will be good. Some will be, some won't. Race them, evaluate them, select the best ones. Only keep offspring that equal or exceed their parents' performance. This is crucial. If you keep inferior offspring just because their parents were good, you're diluting your genetics rather than improving it. Keep records meticulously. Track which pairings produce excellent offspring. Those pairings are genetically successful. Repeat them. Track which pairings produce mediocre offspring despite good parents. Those pairings aren't working genetically. Don't repeat them. Genetic combinations matter. Just because two birds are individually excellent doesn't mean they combine well. Test pairings through their results. Introduce outside genetics occasionally, but carefully. Every 3 to 5 years, bring in a bird from a compatible bloodline that excels in characteristics you want to strengthen. Breed it to your best birds. Test the crosses rigorously. Keep only crosses that perform equal to or better than your pure line. If the crosses are worse, don't keep them. You're testing whether the outside genetics improves your line. If it does, incorporate it gradually. If it doesn't, discard it. Maintain multiple families within your loft if possible. Don't put all genetic eggs in one basket. Keep 2 or 3 different but compatible bloodlines. This gives you options. If one line hits problems, you have others. If you want to try a new cross, you have internal options. Multiple families also lets you maintain some genetic diversity while still breeding within proven stock. Be patient. Genetic improvement takes generations. You won't transform your loft in one breeding season. Meaningful improvement happens over 5, 10, 15 years of consistent selection toward clear goals. People who change their strategy every year, who constantly bring in new bloodlines chasing the latest fashion, never make sustained genetic progress because they never maintain selection pressure long enough for genetics to shift meaningfully. Breed enough birds to select from. If you only breed 10 young birds per year, you have limited selection opportunity. Maybe 1 or 2 are excellent, 8 are average. To make real genetic progress, you need to breed enough birds that you can keep only the truly exceptional ones. Might need to breed 30 or 40 young birds annually to have 5 that are worth keeping for breeding. This means culling aggressively, which is hard emotionally but essential genetically. Let's address the question of buying versus breeding genetics. Should you focus on buying proven birds from established lofts, or should you focus on developing your own genetics through selective breeding? The answer depends on your resources, your timeline, and your goals. Buying proven genetics gives you a head start. You're acquiring birds that already have demonstrated genetics, either through their own performance or their production. You skip years of development. The cost is financial. Good genetics is expensive because the breeder invested years establishing it. You're paying for their work. Breeding your own genetics is cheaper financially but expensive in time. You start with decent foundation stock, you breed, you test, you select, you repeat for years. Eventually you develop birds that perform well for your specific conditions. This is how you create a line adapted precisely to your loft, your climate, your race routes, your management style. But it takes patience and skill. Best strategy for most people is hybrid. Buy a few birds from proven sources as foundation stock. This gives you good genetic starting point. Then breed from those birds, test the offspring, select the best ones, and gradually develop your own strain that's adapted to your situation. You're combining the advantages of purchased genetics, the initial quality, with the advantages of homebred genetics, the local adaptation and selection for your specific needs. Never stop selecting. Doesn't matter if you bought expensive birds or bred your own, you must test them and keep only the ones that actually perform. The genetic quality of your loft depends on the selection pressure you maintain, not on how much you spent or how famous the bloodlines are. Let's talk about genetic limitations. What can you realistically achieve through breeding and what can't you achieve? Genetics sets potential but doesn't guarantee achievement of that potential. A bird might have genetics for extreme speed, but if it's poorly fed, poorly trained, or poorly managed, it won't express that genetic potential. Genetics provides the ceiling. Management determines how close to that ceiling the bird performs. You cannot breed birds that exceed the genetic potential in their foundation stock. If you start with birds from families that race well at 300 kilometers but not 500 kilometers, you probably can't breed through selection to create birds that excel at 500 kilometers. You don't have the genetic variance for extreme endurance in your population. You can improve within the range of variation present, but you can't create abilities that aren't represented in the genes available. This is why foundation stock matters. The genetics you start with determines what's possible to select for. If you want to breed birds for long-distance racing, start with birds from families that succeed at long-distance racing. If you want to breed for speed racing, start with sprint racer bloodlines. You can refine and improve the traits present, but you can't create fundamentally new traits that aren't in the gene pool. Environmental factors interact with genetics. Temperature tolerance, disease resistance, altitude adaptation, these characteristics have genetic components, but are also heavily influenced by environment and management. You can select for birds that perform well in your specific environment, but those same birds might not perform as well in dramatically different conditions. Genetics works within ecological context. Some traits have low heritability, meaning they're more influenced by environment than genetics. Training response, for example, probably has lower heritability than structural characteristics. Some birds learn faster than others, partly due to intelligence, which is genetic, but mostly due to training quality, early experiences, health status, which are environmental. Breeding for low heritability traits is slower and less predictable than breeding for high heritability traits. Understand what genetics can do, provide potential and set limits, and what genetics can't do, guarantee performance or overcome poor management. Breed the best genetics you can access or develop, then manage those genetics excellently to realize their potential. Finally, let's address the relationship between genetics and epigenetics. Epigenetics is a newer field studying how environmental factors can affect gene expression without changing the genetic code itself. In simple terms, your birds have genes, but whether those genes are active or inactive can be influenced by environmental conditions, diet, stress, early development. These environmental effects can sometimes be passed to offspring, meaning offspring inherit not just genes but also some information about the parent's environmental experiences. In pigeons, this might mean that a hen who experiences excellent nutrition and low stress before breeding might produce offspring with better gene expression patterns than genetically identical offspring from a hen under stress with poor nutrition. The genetic code is the same, but the epigenetic regulation is different, potentially affecting the offspring's development and performance. This is a frontier area, and we don't have all the answers yet about how important epigenetics is in pigeon performance. But it suggests that breeder condition matters not just for egg quality, but potentially for long-term offspring outcomes. Maintaining your breeding birds in excellent health and low stress isn't just about producing viable eggs. It might also be optimizing the epigenetic environment that offspring inherit. Practically, this means pay attention to your breeding bird's condition. Keep them healthy, well-fed, stress-free, not just during breeding season, but year-round. Their physiological state might affect how their genetics express in their offspring through epigenetic mechanisms. So where does all this genetic understanding lead? To smarter breeding decisions, to realistic expectations, to strategies based on biological reality rather than myths, to understanding that breeding is about increasing probabilities through selection, not about guaranteeing outcomes through pedigrees, to recognizing that every bird is an individual genetic combination that must be evaluated on its own merits, not assumed to be excellent because its parents were. Genetics gives you tools. Test performance objectively. Select rigorously based on evidence. Pair strategically to combine desirable traits. Introduce fresh genetics carefully to maintain diversity. Keep excellent records to identify successful pairings. Maintain selection pressure consistently over many generations. Cull inferior birds even if their pedigree looks good. Manage your birds excellently, so genetic potential can be realized. Genetics doesn't give you shortcuts. You can't buy a bird with a famous pedigree and skip the work. You still have to test it, breed from it, evaluate its offspring, select the best, cull the rest. The pedigree tells you the bird comes from genetics that succeeded in someone else's hands. Whether that genetic succeeds in your hands depends on whether it fits your conditions and whether you manage it well. Genetics is powerful but not magical. Understanding it lets you breed systematically instead of randomly. It lets you make progress instead of just hoping for luck. But it doesn't eliminate the need for patience, skill, consistent effort, and sometimes acceptance that despite your best efforts, genetics dealt you a mediocre hand this generation, and you need to try again. The great breeders of history, the ones who established the famous bloodlines everyone wants today, they understood genetics intuitively, even if they couldn't explain the science. They tested birds rigorously. They kept only the best. They bred strategically. They were patient. They accepted that most birds aren't champions and focused on finding and propagating the rare ones that are. They built success over decades of careful selection. You can do the same. Not by buying their birds necessarily, though that's one approach, but by applying the same genetic principles they applied. Test thoroughly, select rigorously, breed strategically, be patient, focus on evidence not names, maintain selection pressure, cull inferior birds, keep records. Adapt to what works in your conditions. That's genetics in practice, not chromosomes in DNA sequences, though those are the mechanism, but the practical application of heredity principles to improve your birds generation after generation. That's what matters. That's what works. That's what separates breeders who make lasting progress from breeders who chase pedigrees and wonder why they're not winning. You now understand what genetics is, how inheritance works, what's realistic to expect from breeding, how to select effectively, what factors matter and what factors are myths. Use this knowledge, apply it consistently, and over time you'll develop birds that perform excellently in your hands because you bred and selected for what actually matters. Functional genetics proven through performance, not impressive names on paper. That's genetics made simple. The science is complex, but the principles are straightforward. Inherit from parents, test the individuals, keep the best, repeat for generations. That's how genetics improves. That's how champions are made, not through pedigrees and bloodlines and names, but through ruthless selection of functional excellence, generation after generation, until that excellence becomes your line's genetic signature. Now you have the knowledge. What you do with it determines whether your breeding program succeeds or stagnates. Choose to select based on evidence. Choose to breed strategically. Choose to be patient, and watch your genetics improve. slowly but certainly, until your birds are the ones other people want to buy, because they consistently perform at the level you systematically selected for. That's the power of understanding genetics. Not magic, just biology applied with discipline and intelligence over time. That's available to every breeder willing to do the work, including you.